Thank you to Ford Foundation, Templars Law Firm, Open Society Foundations, and African Women on Board for making this edition of the podcast possible. These conversations are meant to amplify thought leadership emerging on the continent on topics and themes including women's leadership, security, creative and tech power, climate change, trade, youth participation, and so much more. We believe that these modern perspectives will bring about real change on the continent and help us communicate Africa more accurately on the world stage. Hello and welcome to the Africa Soft Power podcast, a show changing narratives and improving realities by incorporating vital and unseen African perspectives into global conversations while strengthening connections with the global diaspora community. My name is Folashade Anozie. Now, as we press play on the final episode of our Summit Edition series, let's do a quick recap. Now, we're wrapping up the first edition of a series that serves as a safe space to amplify African and diaspora thought leadership and foster intersectional conversations that drive change on the continent and globally. From gender equality, governance, basketball, Africa's creative economies, youth power to trade, we have covered it all. And our guests have provided deeply insightful perspectives on the importance of changing narratives, accelerating Africa's economic growth, and building bridges with the diaspora and communities around the world. And guess what? We're not stopping there. We'll be launching a security series next year that we're really excited about. So stay tuned for that. And if you are interested in being a part of the conversation, please send an email to shade@africasoftpower.com. But for now, on this last episode of the Summit Edition series, we are closing things off with 4 exceptional guests who joined us to discuss the role of African governments and the private sector in achieving gender equality, helping growth businesses achieve scale, a future-ready and inclusive approach to leadership, and embracing AI. Our guests are Ambassador Charity Manyeruke, the Ambassador of the Republic of Zimbabwe to Rwanda, Christopher Wiliams, Chairman of Enda Athletic, Rosa Nduati Mutero, the Managing Partner at Anjarwalla and Khanna, and Ugochukwu Smooth-Nzewi, a Nigerian artist, art historian, and curator at the Department of Painting and Sculpture at the Museum of Modern Art. Hello, Ambassador Charity. Welcome to the Africa Soft Power podcast. How are you doing, madam?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me here.
It's a pleasure to have you here. This is your first time at the Africa Soft Power Summit, right?
Yes, it is.
What has your experience been like thus far?
I think it is an exciting experience to be in a room where the African women are discussing, together with people from all over the world, Europe, from Latin America, from all over the world, to talk about soft power, to talk about gender equality and the quality of gender equality. It is amazing. And also just that the panelists, they are very vibrant and they are reminding us, what have been achieved and what is the potential, and also the importance of data. Statistics is very, very important.
Crucial.
But also the practicalities of gender equality. For example, we had that lady who is manufacturing sports shoes, and on a very serious note, that is quite encouraging. Looking at what are the possibilities in Kenya and the world. I'm quite impressed at that dynamism, which is coming out. And also there is that positivity that women are contributing. They are also women producers. But what is important in all this is that there has to be deliberate policies coming from the governments, the private sector. For example, I am a product of deliberate policy. Just being a woman ambassador, being on the table alongside men is a big recognition. Policies, legislation are created by governments, but also there is that aspect which is being discussed there, the issue of private sector investments, which is very, very key in promoting gender equality and the quality of gender equality.
Yeah. And what was your journey like to becoming an ambassador? Because you said that you're a product of intentional policies, right? So can you just share people along the way who helped you move your way up professionally?
Mine has been a combination of men and women, starting with my own family. My mother, being a big promoter of myself, my schooling, and my father, being there to inspire me because my father was a financial expert. May his dear soul rest in peace. He died because of COVID in 2020. But, the headmaster of my secondary school also, a white man, I should say, was recognizing, my abilities, capabilities, and supporting. Then we go to university, the professors there recognizing that I have some potential, in supporting and nurturing it. And we're talking of both male and women professors. Of course, like the women, I remember Professor Roga, even when I became a professor myself, she was holding my hand, really assisting me, which I really appreciate. And of course, government's recognition of a woman professor, a woman leader at a university. I was a dean of the Faculty of Social Studies. Then, having the president to recognize me and appoint me, as ambassador to Rwanda. But you can see it is deliberate, it is supportive, it is creating opportunities for women, but also our government, President Mnangagwa, also investing in women. That is the other thing that, must be recognized. That political will, which is being discussed at this conference, that the investments, the political will is very important.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. Because I wanted to ask you, have you heard something today that has made you say, oh, this is really powerful?
Yes, I think the issue of the political will raised by Claire Akamanzi really touched me. That President Kagame has that political will, the willingness to put women in leadership, and this is why we see 50% in cabinet are women, 60% in the House of Assembly are women, 30% in the Senate are women. That willingness, is very important. In Zimbabwe, for example, the Minister of Defense, OCZ Mchunguri Kashiri, is a woman, quite a big recognition. And Dr. Sekai Nzeza, who's heading the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, is a woman. So it's coming from the leadership, But of course, it needs to be spread across all sectors and, and I'm talking of in the productive sector, in the film industry. But I also liked that lady from Nigeria who spoke about the head of Civil Aviation Commission, about the 7 C's that she was talking about. Courage,
Some other stuff.
Yeah. It was very, very inspiring about what needs to be done. Commitment. She spoke about commitment. When we have commitment at individual level, at family level, at organizational level, at national level, surely we will have quality gender equality. I think that is very good. And also what Mataruka said, from IFC, the resident representative of Rwanda and Uganda, that it touched me. Only 1% of the global budget is going for women in business, which is very, very low. It's a statistic which tells us that there is need for deliberate efforts by government, by the private sector to inject and promote gender equality. And women have a lot of potential. You talked about when you invest in a woman, it is important, because women take care of families. So it is important. Yeah, that is what is. Also the issue of those shoes, which are being made, the sports shoes.
Yes.
I said I want to buy my pair. Because it is being produced in Africa by an African. It's an African concept. And it is real. It is practical. We need to go for it. All this is making the African governments think outside their box, which is very, very important. But look, here is a conference that is allowing us to reflect on African soft power, what as an African people we can do for our development, involving women empowerment, gender equality, to take stock of what we have done. But also, I am inspired as an ambassador, by this conference, the level of participation and, the level of depth and knowledge that is in Africa and the potential that we have. And I think the time of action is now, and the time of growth is now.
Yeah. Well said, Ambassador. Thank you so much, Ambassador Charity, for your time.
Thank you so much for having me here.
It's a pleasure. Hi, Christopher. For those who are listening, I'm laughing because before we came on, I was asking, "Oh, hi, Mr. Christopher. What would you like that I address you as, Mr. Christopher or Mr. Wiliams?" And he's like, "None. Don't make me feel old."
Yeah, I prefer Christopher.
Nice to meet you.
Likewise.
So this is your first time at the summit, right?
Actually, it's my second. I was here last year.
Oh, so okay, there was a girl that came from Enda.
Enda,
yes. Oh.
Well, I happened to be in town because my brother works for the NBA, so I was here.
Who's your brother?
His name is Victor Wiliams.
That's your brother?
Yes.
Oh.
And yes. Yeah. So I was here supporting him, and at the time I was an advisor to Enda, and Nava happened to be here as well, presenting. I think she was on the panel. Mm-hmm. So I visited and was here part of the day.
What did you think about, when you first visited?
I thought it was an interesting idea. I think, there's something going on, I think, in the world at large. And I think for me, there's something that has been evolving in my own life and has been so for the last 3 years, which was this idea of, after having spent 25 years in the corporate world, to begin to reflect on what I hope is the next half of my life. I turned 50 about 2 years ago. One of the things I decided to do was to, be more reflective and thoughtful about what I did. And that included not working with big corporate organizations anymore.
Why was that?
I think that had served its course. I think for many people, the aspiration is to get to the C-suite and be rich and be famous. I realized as I was going through the journey that was not my goal. I think once upon a time I thought it was, but as I got into, very high levels of the corporate world, I realized that that's not what I wanted to do. For the simple reason that I felt that at some point it's less about giving of your best and more about surviving and maintaining status. And I worked with people who I felt were more obsessed with that than the work that we were all supposed to be doing. So I just decided that that was not going to be my situation. And moreover, I think I became more aware of the length of time that I have been away from some of the things that I truly enjoy doing, including working with young people, including working with growth businesses or with founders or leaders who are trying to figure things out. And I started to enjoy doing that more, and I decided to take a step out of that, off the corporate ladder, if you may, and do that full time. So I've been consulting, working with small brands, Black and brown founders mostly, but generally anyone who's working on disruptive ideas. And I found that more enjoyable and more enriching at a personal level, and maybe I would hope at a communal, social level as well, than me, growing and rising up the corporate ladder. Nothing wrong with it, but I decided it was not for me anymore.
Did you fight that realization for a while?
I don't know that I fought it. I know that it probably would not have been a decision I would have made 10 years ago. So I think it's one of those things that when the time has come, it's so compelling that quite honestly there's not much to fight about. So I think for me, when I started my career, would I have been an entrepreneur? Probably not. I don't think I knew a lot about what that meant. And I was also perhaps more focused on a traditional definition of success. And I think that carried me throughout much of my career. And indeed, I got success and I enjoyed it. And it was good for me at a personal, professional level and maybe even a financial one. But once I got to realizing that I was compromising and trading off maybe too much happiness and too much joy and too much family time and maybe even some values, then it stopped making sense. So once that realization set in, there was nothing to really fight because for me, the facts were quite obvious. It was more a question of how do you transition out and what do you do? So I ended up taking a year off and was exec in residence at a university, actually 2 universities, ended up being president of one of them and ran that for a couple of years and then decided to go out and just work on my own projects. So that's what I do today. And I speak, I write, I'm working on a book, I advise companies, I sit on boards. It's a little bit of a hodgepodge of different things, but I enjoy it.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, particularly because a lot of times you hear that struggle seem to happen more with women than men. It seems like men are told to just have your blinders on. It doesn't matter if you have to compromise your life or whatever values you have, but women, sometimes society makes it seem like if you choose to go that route, you're a bad person. Whereas men, it's like, oh yeah, of course you should do that.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. And I think it's a strange set of concepts. And I think it's societal to some degree. And I think once you begin to understand that it's societal, then at least for me, I feel comfortable then bucking that trend. And that's, you go back to the question about Africa soft power. And last year, I think what resonated with me was giving people permission to begin to think this way. And one of the comments this morning was something around feeling entitled, which is something that I write about a lot. And in the US where I live, the word entitlement has a baggage. And yes, it needs that baggage. When I think about entitlement, I think about the notion that everyone at a point of birth and maybe until death is actually equal, and that every bird, no matter where they're born or what station they're born into, has a God-given right not just to exist, but also to self-actualize. And the journey of deciding who you are, who you want to become, and what impact you want to have on the world, as long as it's not about suppressing other people, you're entitled to that journey. You're entitled to maximize yourself, and you're entitled to that. That is a God-given right, in my view. I'm not a religious person in that sense, but I use the word God because I want it to be unequivocal that you have that right. It's not negotiable. So I think, yes, people need to be entitled to their potential. They need to be entitled to their own values. They need to be entitled to their ability to grow and be the best version of themselves that they can be. So I think that was the message that I took away from ASP last year, and I think it's resonated as well this year. That's why I think it's an important conversation for us to be having.
Yeah, definitely. And for people who don't know, you're the chairman of Enda Athletic. Can you just share a bit about how you found out about the brand and why you chose to join?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of those things that you just let happen because the time has come and then things happen and you just go with the flow. In the last year, I was at African Leadership University that I ran as president. Someone introduced me to a private equity firm that turned out was an investor in Enda. And once I connected with those partners of that firm, they introduced me to Enda as one of their portfolio companies that they thought could benefit from my help. So I informally spoke with them for several months, and then the two co-founders asked me to join them in a board role. And I was the only board member in addition to them. And we continued having more regular conversations, but I wasn't involved in the operations, and I wasn't sure what they were doing day by day. I knew what they were doing strategically, but I wasn't involved in day-by-day tactical decision-making. Until late last year, I started to become more and more aware of operations and post-COVID issues and how that impacted supply chain and cash flow. And to cut a long story short, there was a situation that we needed to manage related to COVID. And I stepped in and started to be more involved. And then I was asked to be chairman of the board. And as we continue to navigate the issues, I saw the opportunity to help them more consistently. And I became an executive chair. And that has evolved to today. I'm one of the co-founders, a new one, and working to now take the company forward. So this now has become my full-time job.
Yeah.
So that's what I do. And it's a powerful idea whose time I think is overdue. It's a Kenyan-based inspired running brand. But I think the big idea for Enda is to be a global African sports brand for the simple reason that I think its ability to inspire, educate, catalyze the world means that it needs to speak to people not just in Africa, but in the West, and also be a source of pride and a canvas for storytelling, positive storytelling about people from the diaspora. And that involves, Africans in Africa, Africans who have migrated to other parts of the world, people who are taken there in different ways, African-Americans, Afro-Europeans, and even, Afro-Brazilians. And everywhere you find Africans or people from this bigger diaspora, I think Enda can be a very powerful messenger of what it takes to be excellent and what it takes to be excellent when you don't have a lot of material wealth, which I think is the epitome of the Kenyan running community. Nava, my co-founder, talks about from gravel to gravy. They start off running on the dirt hills of Iten or Ildoret, and they end up running, on the pavements and standing on the podiums in the Berlin Marathon or the Olympic Games. So and they don't do that with a lot of entitlement in a negative sense of that definition, or a sense that the world owes them anything. They just work hard and apply themselves. So I think that's the ethos that Kenyan runners embody, but Africans also embody, which brand Enda will embody as well.
Yeah, I love that. That's really cool. My final question is, what was the last song or album that you listened to?
It's funny because just this morning I think it was a Bob Marley song. I like Three Little Birds. It's one of my favorites. I like the melody and I like just the tonality of his delivery. The other day I sat down with my kids. I was trying to help them understand Prince Miko, Sweet Mother, which I think has many levels of understanding, not just your maternal sort of relationship with your mom, but mother in the sense of the Africa conversation that we're having. So because Africa has been through a lot, but it has always continued to give a lot, and not just to Africans, but people who've taken from it. But it still thrives. So I think it's kind of the epitome of that song.
I love that, Christopher. That's a great ending.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks a lot for having me. This was fun.
Hello, Rosa. Welcome to the Africa Soft Power podcast.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to have you here. This is your first time at the summit, right?
Yes, it is.
What has your experience been like thus far?
Very exciting. It's a very vibrant summit, and it is addressing real issues and looking for real solutions, which is something that we all must make sure we do when we visit or when we participate in events such as this.
That's great. I'm not so sure what panel that you were on.
The ESG.
Thank you so much, madam. What was your experience like hearing different perspectives or maybe similar perspectives from the other panelists?
So I was on the panel for ESG, and the title was "The Time is Now: Why the Private Sector is Key to Achieving Gender Equity." I think the setup of the panel was very relevant because it had representation from DFI, so IFC was there, and it had representation from a private equity investor. And it also had representation from myself, who's in the legal profession and dealing with corporate entities. And then we also had someone from the Bank of Industry.
Yes.
And so with the industry players as ourselves, at least we could be able to comment credibly on what the private sector should be doing, what it has done, and what it should be doing to address this issue. I love
how the person interviewing you doesn't know the name of the panel, but you're correcting me. So
you're very welcome.
Thank you so much. My brain has just been all over the entire place. Now, were there any key insights or comments that any of the other panelists shared that just stuck out to you and you said, oh, wow, this is really insightful?
I think there were very interesting points that were made, and maybe I could highlight 3 of them.
Of course.
The first is that it's very important to know that we have data gaps, and the data gaps do not help in this conversation, and that there should be concerted efforts to make sure that these data gaps are actually breached. And there's need for more information in general, whether in the corporate sector, in the private sector, in the public sector. There's need for more data that helps to identify the issues and then to be able to address them. That was one main point. The second point is, of course, that as investments are being done, private sector needs to be keen to make sure that they wear a gender lens in making their investments. And what that means is not to be ignorant of the fact that there are certain matters that affect one gender more than the other. So, for example, one of our panelists did talk about some of the investments that they're making in the power and the energy sector, and said that a lot of households that are affected by the lack of electricity are more disproportionately unfair to women who are running those households. So if you provide more efficient power, if you provide solar energy and things like that, you actually disproportionately then advantage the women. And that was also a very good point. I think the last point was around culture and how it is that private sector can drive the conversation. And it starts from organizations in their internal culture, because we discussed that culture, it's strategy for breakfast. And so organizations may want to have gender equity, but if they don't have the culture to propagate that, then it's not going to go anywhere.
Those are fantastic points, really, really fantastic points. And you recently wrote an article on LinkedIn that I just found very interesting, and I wanted to get your perspective on those. If you could just share more light. You had written about how the digital age and automation has significantly changed the very real concerns that leaders in organizations and directors of boards have regarding the future of their institutions.
Yes.
And how having a great tech person on a board
Yes.
is not only recommended, is essential.
Yes.
Can you speak about that a bit?
Yes. What I was trying to underscore is the importance of technology and to understand that we are in a digital age. By being in a digital age, what it means is that every company is affected one way or the other by technology. And therefore, this is something that needs to be addressed from the very top. And so the board needs to be conscious about what does digitalization mean for our company, and how do we leverage on the transformation that's happening in the digital space. And to do that, you need an expert on the board Just the way you need somebody who's a legal expert to help you with the legal matters. Just the way you need an accountant and financial experts to help in terms of the audit committee issues, for example. Not because they're the only ones who can help, but they're crucial in the conversation. And so in the same way, we need technologically adept and actually professionals in the board to carry this conversation or to be able to give the technical expertise that is needed. In the same way, automation goes hand in hand because we are moving into a world where AI is actually key. And everyone should be looking to be more efficient. That's just it. Automation is about efficiency and the speed at which you go to market and the speed at which you can be able to solve problems, because all companies should be about solving a problem.
Yeah.
And so that was what I was talking about.
Excellent. And then one other thing that you had mentioned was that young people cannot gain experience on boards if we don't give them the chance to learn from us. We should incorporate them more. Our future depends on them.
Yeah.
Now, for young people who are looking to get on boards, should they be doing anything specifically for boards to notice them? Or should they just keep on with the great work that they do and eventually the board will notice them? So it's more of like, should you be more intentional in your strategy or just keep on coasting the way you're coasting?
Unfortunately, in this world, you really have to stand up and put your hand up. And so those are two things, standing up and putting your hand up. Standing up may not even be enough. Putting up your hand is also important. And so what young people need to appreciate is the older generation, of course, want to do things quickly with the expertise that they need. And so you need to be able to bring something on the table. You will not be able to bring experience. And that's a given. That will take you time, and that is fine. But what else can you bring? And as young people, we can bring expertise on the table, actually, if you think about it. And so making sure you upskill yourself, either by going back to school, doing a master's, or doing a professional course, that doesn't take as much time as experience. But when you put it on your CV, then it gets people talking that you are down the road towards technical proficiency, and what you need is the experience. The other thing that young people can do, of course, the older generation are baffled by some of the conversations that we have now. Just what we're talking about, automation, understanding Gen Z. There's so many areas that really need a young mind to be able to wrap your head around. And that's something that the young people can bring on the table. But that needs to come around with level-headedness and appreciation and understanding of the environment. And I think those are some of the ways in which young people can stand up and then put their hand up also. And then they'll find themselves on the boards. Then they can get the experience after that.
I love that. You need to be intentional.
Yeah.
Now, my final question is, what was the last song or album that you listened to?
Oh, wow. I have to think quickly, isn't it? Well, I enjoy Maverick. And so I think on Sunday, the last song I listened to, I'm trying to remember, but it was, the title of the album is Welcome Home.
Okay.
I think it's Welcome Home.
Okay.
And it's by Maverick. And
Okay.
I enjoyed it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rosa.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Hello, Mr. Smooth. Welcome to the Africa Soft Power podcast.
Hello, Shade.
How has your experience been at the summit thus far?
Well, it's been wonderful. I mean, this is my first time actually being participating in the Africa Soft Power. No, not true. I was in the audience when the Africa Soft Power came to have
It
the
was virtual, yeah.
the first one. The second one, that was the first time they actually had a presence at Baza Miami in 2021.
Yes,
so I was
yes,
in the
yes,
audience.
yes.
In that one. So but I've always, from the very beginning, I have been sort of in conversation with Nkiru about the project. But I think it's really beautiful in all its ramifications. I have enjoyed the conversations. I found them very stimulating. And I think these are conversations that are coming from the inside. They're generated from the inside, meaning that the conversations actually represents the experiences of people working on the continent. And so because it reflects the experiences of people working on the continent, they're able to generate solutions that easily represent that experiences of folks that live and work on the continent.
Yeah. Now, what specific panels did you enjoy the most, or did you find stood out to you? I mean, all the panels were amazing, but obviously you're a human being and some things you connect more to than others. So was there anything that stood out to you?
Now, I would say that all the panels were incredibly good in different ways. Mm-hmm. I thought they were all amazing speakers. I did enjoy the panel where you had, trying to remember, the guy who works at Netflix.
Oh, Aaron Mitchell?
Yeah, I thought that was I thought it was an amazing panel because, and I think part of the reason I enjoyed it, it wasn't a panel that made excuses for women. It wasn't a panel that made excuses for inclusion. It's a panel that allowed us to look at the history of women participation in economics in different ways that we lost at some point, in part by the Victorian legacy of colonialism. How that sort of disrupted the way in which there was a sense of labor partnership between men and women in Africa. So I thought it was important to return to sort of the way in which were more traditional to us and the way we did business. But having said that, we also understand that because of the legacy of colonialism through the Victorian more, it was the Victorian sensibility that insisted that women should learn home economics, that women should become models of mothers at home to take care of their families while men go do blue-collar work. It wasn't the way it was before, so we should understand that in itself, So I truly enjoyed how those sort of conversations sort of expanded the discourse around women participation and all of that in labor and economics and all of that. And so that was very enriching to hear. But I thought it was good to think about that conversation vis-a-vis the other conversations on revolutionizing systems, women's leadership as a catalyst for change. I thought it was good to sort of place the two conversations, those two panels in conversation. I thought it was an extremely well put together, and so I thoroughly enjoyed both.
That's fun. I'm glad to hear that. And tomorrow you're going to be moderating the panel AI, the future of work and art, collaborator or competitor. Where is Africa in this? What are one or two things you're looking to spotlight or ensure that the panels, the speakers address?
Well, for one thing, I think AI is really a new phenomenon. It has a long history. There's been a history of the development of AI technology, and you see that in films, So it goes way back to the 50s and 60s. And over the decades, there were moments of deep interest by certain Western governments. And then they realized some of the potential pitfalls and decided not to move ahead. But in the last few years, there's been an increase in interest. But what strikes me as other technological leaps and industrializations in human history is often how Africa come late to the party, So in spite of the pitfalls that some have identified with AI technology, one of the things that I think we would like to discuss at length is if we think it's the way forward, how can Africa be best prepared not to play catch up as usual, So I think that is something I think I would like for us to tease out in the conversation tomorrow.
Yeah, looking forward to that. And my final question before I let you go is, what was the last song or album that you listened to?
Well, I've been traveling since the last few weeks. I've been moving from one place to the other. I think in the course of traveling, I was at Chimurenga in Cape Town, which is run by Ntone Ajabe, who's a Cameroonian intellectual who's also a DJ. And so he has a very impressive album archive, And so while I was there with a group of colleagues, he played a Bob Marley track. I don't remember that Bob Marley track. But I also realized that I saw at another place in Cape Town that I visited, another art foundation, I saw an old album sleeve of Oliver Nduati, the Zimbabwean pop star that I know a lot of people don't know. And what that did was it brought back a flood of memory of my attending Nduati's concert in Nairobi in 2005. Wow. So Oliver Nduati indirectly is the artist that has been on my mind in the last 2 days.
That's great.
All right.
Thank you to all our guests who made this Summit Edition series incredible, and thank you to our amazing listeners for being with us every step of the way. If you enjoyed this final episode and series, please rate us on your preferred podcast platform. And to learn more about Africa Soft Power, visit africasoftpower.com. Also check us out on social media to stay up to date on our programming. We are on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at Africa Soft Power. This episode is produced and edited by Folashade Anozie. The show's executive producer is Dr. Nkiru Balon. Music for the show is by Imodu Ayonote. Till next time, thanks so much for listening.